Judge Jamal Hayes tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, humming along to the jazz playing softly through his car's speakers. The leather seats of his new Mercedes still had that fresh car smell he loved. As he cruised down Maple Avenue, lined with sprawling mansions and manicured lawns, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. After years of hard work, he'd finally made it to this exclusive neighborhood. His peaceful drive came to an abrupt halt as red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror. Jamal's brow furrowed as he pulled over, wondering what he could have done wrong. He'd been driving well under the speed limit, enjoying the scenery. Officer Karen Michaels approached the driver's side window, her hand resting on her holster. "License and registration," she demanded, her tone clipped and harsh. Jamal complied, reaching for his wallet. "May I ask what the problem is, officer?" Officer Michaels ignored his question, snatching the documents from his hand. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned them, then looked back at Jamal. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." "Excuse me?" Jamal's confusion turned to disbelief. "I don't understand. What's going on?" "I said, step out of the vehicle. Now." Officer Michaels' hand tightened on her holster. Jamal's heart raced, but he kept his voice calm and steady. "Officer, I'm Judge Jamal Hayes. This is my car. I live just down the street. There must be some misunderstanding." Officer Michaels scoffed. "A likely story. Out of the car now. Don't make me ask again." Jamal slowly opened the door, his mind racing. As he stepped onto the pavement, he noticed curious neighbors peeking out from behind curtains. The shame and anger burned in his chest, but he fought to keep his composure. "Turn around, hands on the car," Officer Michaels barked. "This is completely unnecessary," Jamal protested, even as he complied. "I've done nothing wrong." Officer Michaels began patting him down roughly. "We've had reports of car thefts in the area. This vehicle matches the description of one that was stolen last week." Jamal's jaw clenched. "I can assure you, this car was not stolen. I purchased it 3 days ago. If you'd just let me explain. Save it for the station." Officer Michaels cut him off, reaching for her handcuffs. Jamal's mind raced. He knew his rights, knew the law better than most. But in this moment, none of that seemed to matter. The weight of generations of injustice pressed down on him, threatening to crush his spirit. But Jamal Hayes was not a man easily broken. "Officer Michaels," he said, his voice steady and firm, "before you do anything you might regret, I suggest you call your superior. I'm sure they'd be very interested to know you're about to arrest a federal judge without probable cause." Officer Michaels hesitated, her hand hovering over the handcuffs. "You expect me to believe you're a judge?" "I expect you to do your job properly," Jamal replied, "which includes verifying my identity before making a wrongful arrest. Call your superior. Now." Something in his tone must have gotten through to her. Officer Michaels took a step back, her confidence wavering. She reached for her radio, her eyes never leaving Jamal. As they waited for a response, tension crackled in the air. Jamal could feel the eyes of his neighbors on him, could almost hear the whispers behind closed doors. He'd fought so hard to get here, to prove himself worthy of respect and admiration. And now, in the span of a few minutes, he was reduced to a suspect in the eyes of those who should have been his peers. The radio crackled to life, and a gruff voice came through. "Michaels, what's the situation?" Officer Michaels explained, her voice growing less certain with each word. When she finished, there was a long pause. "Michaels, stand down immediately. Judge Hayes is a respected member of the community. I'm on my way." The color drained from Officer Michaels' face as she lowered her radio. She looked at Jamal, a mix of confusion and embarrassment in her eyes. I'm sorry, Your Honor. There seems to have been a misunderstanding." Jamal straightened his jacket, his dignity intact despite the ordeal. "A misunderstanding. Is that what we're calling racial profiling these days, Officer Michaels?" Before she could respond, another police car pulled up. A tall, older man with salt and pepper hair stepped out. Captain Roberts, the head of the local precinct. "Judge Hayes," he called out as he approached. "I can't begin to apologize enough for this incident. Rest assured, we'll get to the bottom of this." Jamal nodded, his mind already racing with the implications of what had just happened. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person of color who'd ever been wrongly accused, every life ruined by unchecked prejudice. As Captain Roberts turned to reprimand Officer Michaels, Jamal made a decision that would change not just his life, but the lives of countless others. "Captain," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his position, "I'd like to speak with you and Officer Michaels, not as a victim, but as someone who believes we can turn this unfortunate incident into an opportunity for growth and change." Captain Roberts looked at him with surprise and respect. "Of course, Your Honor. Whatever you need." As they walked towards the captain's car, Jamal couldn't help but wonder, could this moment be the catalyst for real change? Or would it be just another footnote in a long history of injustice? Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about justice, prejudice, and the power of one person to make a difference. "Captain," Jamal said as they reached the car, "I think we need to have a serious conversation about the state of policing in this community. Would you agree?" Captain Roberts nodded solemnly. "I believe you're right, Judge Hayes. This incident has opened my eyes to issues I thought we'd addressed. I'm all ears." Captain Roberts nodded solemnly. "I believe you're right, Judge Hayes. This incident has opened my eyes to issues I thought we'd addressed. I'm all ears." Jamal took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping from Captain Roberts to Officer Michaels, who stood nearby, her face a mix of shame and defiance. "Let's start by acknowledging the elephant in the room. This wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. It was a clear case of racial profiling." Officer Michaels opened her mouth to protest, but Captain Roberts held up a hand, silencing her. "Go on, Judge," he said, his expression grave. "What happened here today is a symptom of a much larger problem," Jamal continued. "It's not just about one officer or one incident. It's about a system that perpetuates bias and prejudice, often unconsciously." As Jamal spoke, a small crowd began to gather at a respectful distance. Neighbors who had watched the incident unfold from behind their curtains now stood on their lawns, drawn by the presence of the police captain and the dignified bearing of the man they now realized was Judge Hayes. "I propose we use this incident as a catalyst for change," Jamal said, his voice carrying across the quiet street, "not through punishment or public shaming, but through education and understanding." Captain Roberts raised an eyebrow. "What exactly are you suggesting, Judge?" Jamal turned to face Officer Michaels directly. "Officer, I'm not interested in seeing you lose your job. That wouldn't solve anything. Instead, I want to invite you to spend a week shadowing me in my courtroom." Officer Michaels blinked in surprise. "Your Honor, you'll see firsthand the challenges faced by people of color in our justice system," Jamal explained. "You'll witness the impact of unconscious bias on sentencing, on jury selection, on every aspect of the legal process." Captain Roberts nodded slowly. "That's an interesting proposal, Judge, but I'm not sure our department has the resources to—" "I'll make it happen," Jamal interrupted. "I'll speak with the chief of police myself if necessary. This is too important to let bureaucracy stand in the way." As they talked, Mrs. Thompson, Jamal's next-door neighbor, approached hesitantly. "Judge Hayes, is everything all right? We saw what happened and, well, we're all quite shocked." Jamal turned to her with a warm smile. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Thompson. In fact, I think something good might come out of this unfortunate incident." An idea sparked in Jamal's mind. He looked back at Captain Roberts. "Captain, what if we expanded this program? Not just for Officer Michaels, but for the entire precinct. And in return, I and other judges could spend time with your officers, gaining a better understanding of the challenges they face daily." Captain Roberts' eyes widened. "That's ambitious, Judge, but I can see the potential benefits." "It's more than just benefits," Jamal pressed. "It's about breaking down the walls that separate us. It's about fostering understanding and empathy on both sides." As he spoke, Jamal could see the impact his words were having. The neighbors who had gathered were nodding in agreement. Even Officer Michaels, who had been standing stiffly to the side, seemed to be listening intently. "We have a unique opportunity here," Jamal continued, "to turn a moment of conflict into a chance for growth, to show our community that we're committed to justice in its truest form." Captain Roberts rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "It won't be easy. There will be resistance, both from my officers and from some in the judicial system." "Nothing worth doing is ever easy, Captain," Jamal replied. "But I believe it's necessary. What happened today? It's not an isolated incident. It's happening all across our country, every day. And it won't stop until we take active steps to change it." As Jamal spoke, he noticed a young boy watching from the sidewalk, his eyes wide with curiosity. It was Tommy, the son of another neighbor, who often waved to Jamal as he left for work in the mornings. Jamal walked over to Tommy, kneeling down to meet the boy's eyes. "Hey there, Tommy. What do you think about all this?" Tommy looked nervously at the police officers, then back at Jamal. I don't know. My dad says we should always respect the police, but they were being mean to you, and you didn't do anything wrong." Jamal nodded solemnly. "You're right, Tommy. I didn't do anything wrong. But here's the important part. The police officers are here to protect us. Sometimes they make mistakes, just like everyone else. What matters is how we handle those mistakes. Do we get angry and turn our backs on each other? Or do we try to understand each other and work together to do better?" Tommy thought for a moment, then smiled. "Work together?" Jamal ruffled the boy's hair. "That's right, and that's what we're going to try to do here." Standing up, Jamal turned back to Captain Roberts and Officer Michaels. "This isn't just about us. It's about building a better future for kids like Tommy. A future where they don't have to fear being judged by the color of their skin, whether they're walking down the street or sitting behind the wheel of a car." Captain Roberts nodded, a new resolve in his eyes. "You're right, Judge. We owe it to the next generation to do better. I'll support your program, and I'll fight to make sure it's implemented department-wide." Officer Michaels stepped forward, her voice quiet but steady. "Your Honor, I want to apologize. I made assumptions based on prejudices I didn't even realize I had. I'd be honored to participate in your program." Jamal extended his hand to her. "Thank you, Officer Michaels. Your willingness to acknowledge your mistake and learn from it is the first step towards real change." As they shook hands, a smattering of applause broke out from the gathered neighbors. Mrs. Thompson wiped a tear from her eye. Judge Hayes, we're lucky to have you in our community. Is there anything we can do to support this initiative?" Jamal looked around at the faces of his neighbors, seeing a mix of emotions: shame, hope, determination. "As a matter of fact, there is," he said. "This isn't just about the police and the courts. It's about our entire community. I'd like to organize a series of town hall meetings where we can all come together to discuss these issues openly and honestly." Captain Roberts nodded. "The police department would be happy to participate in those meetings, Judge. It's time we had some real dialogue with the community we serve." As the crowd murmured their agreement, Jamal felt a glimmer of hope. What had started as a humiliating and potentially dangerous encounter was transforming into something powerful, a movement for change that could ripple out far beyond their small community. But as he looked at the faces around him, Jamal knew that the real work was just beginning. Changing hearts and minds wouldn't happen overnight. It would take time, patience, and persistence. "Well," he said, clapping his hands together, "I think we've all had enough excitement for one day. Captain Roberts, Officer Michaels, why don't we meet tomorrow to start hammering out the details of our program?" As the crowd began to disperse and the police prepared to leave, Mrs. Thompson approached Jamal once more. "Judge Hayes," she said, her voice low, "I have to admit, when you first moved into the neighborhood, I was hesitant. I'm ashamed of that now. I hope you can forgive an old woman's foolishness." Jamal smiled warmly at her. "Mrs. Thompson, forgiveness is the first step towards understanding. I'm just glad we're moving in the right direction now." As he watched the last of the police cars drive away, Jamal couldn't help but feel a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. He turned to head back to his house, his mind already racing with plans for the future. But as he reached his front door, he paused. Something about this whole situation felt off, like there was more going on than met the eye. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but a nagging feeling in the back of his mind told him that this incident might have been more than just a random act of profiling. Jamal shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. "One step at a time," he muttered to himself as he unlocked his door. "One step at a time." Little did he know, those steps were about to lead him down a path far more treacherous than he could have imagined. As he closed the door behind him, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number and contained just 4 words. "Watch your back. Judge." Jamal stared at the message, his blood running cold. What had he just gotten himself into? Jamal stared at the message, his blood running cold. What had he just gotten himself into? He quickly locked his door and drew the curtains, his mind racing. The events of the day suddenly took on a more sinister cast. Was the traffic stop really just a case of racial profiling, or part of something larger? Jamal's judicial instincts kicked in. He needed more information before jumping to conclusions. He saved the number and screenshot the message, then called his longtime friend and confidant, Detective Marcus Johnson. "Marcus, it's Jamal. I need your help with something. Off the books." Marcus's voice came through, concern evident. "Jamal, what's going on?" Jamal quickly recounted the day's events, ending with the threatening text. "I need you to trace this number, Marcus," quietly. "Consider it done," Marcus replied. "But Jamal, be careful. If someone's targeting you, we need to take this to the higher-ups." "Not yet," Jamal said firmly. "We don't know what we're dealing with. Let's gather some intel first." After hanging up, Jamal paced his living room, his earlier optimism fading into a gnawing worry. He'd made enemies over the years. It came with the territory of being a judge. But this felt different, more personal. A knock at the door made him jump. Cautiously, he approached and looked through the peephole. It was Tommy, the young boy from earlier, shifting nervously on his feet. Jamal opened the door, forcing a smile. "Tommy, what's up, buddy?" Tommy looked up at him, his eyes wide. "Judge Hayes, I heard my dad talking on the phone. He sounded really angry. He said your name and something about teaching him a lesson. I thought you should know." Jamal's heart raced, but he kept his voice calm for Tommy's sake. "Thank you for telling me, Tommy. That was very brave of you. Now go on home, okay? Everything's going to be fine." As Tommy scampered off, Jamal closed the door, his mind whirling. Tommy's father, Jack Wilson, was a local business owner. Jamal had ruled against him in a discrimination case last year. Could he be behind this? Before he could ponder further, his phone rang. It was Marcus. "Jamal, I've got something. That number, it's a burner phone, but I traced its recent activity. It's been making calls to the police station." Jamal's breath caught. "The police station? You don't think—" "I don't know what to think," Marcus cut in. "But whatever's going on, it's bigger than we thought." "You need to watch your step, Jamal." After hanging up, Jamal sank into his armchair, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. He'd wanted to make a difference, to change the system from within, but now it seemed the system was fighting back. His doorbell rang, startling him out of his thoughts. This time, it was Captain Roberts. "Judge Hayes," the captain said, his face grim. "We need to talk." Jamal led him to the living room, every nerve on edge. "What's this about, Captain?" Roberts sighed heavily. "There's no easy way to say this, Judge. We've received an anonymous tip. There are allegations of corruption against you, bribery, misconduct on the bench." Jamal felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. "What? That's absurd. You can't possibly believe—" "I don't know what to believe," Roberts interrupted. "But I had to warn you. There's going to be an investigation, and Judge, it's not looking good." As Roberts left, Jamal's mind raced. This wasn't a coincidence. The traffic stop, the text, Tommy's warning, and now these allegations, it was all connected. Someone was trying to discredit him, to destroy everything he'd worked for. But why? And more importantly, who? Jamal spent a sleepless night pondering these questions. By morning, he'd made a decision. He couldn't trust anyone, not the police, not his colleagues on the bench. He'd have to investigate this himself. He called in sick to work, something he'd never done in his entire career. Then he started digging. He pulled out old case files, court transcripts, anything that might give him a clue as to who might have a grudge against him. As he worked, a pattern began to emerge. Several of his recent rulings had gone against a local construction company, Apex Builders. They'd been cited for unsafe working conditions, discrimination, and environmental violations. And the owner of Apex Builders? None other than Jack Wilson, Tommy's father. But something still didn't add up. How did this connect to the police? And why now? A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Jamal approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. It was Officer Michaels. He opened the door a crack, chain still in place. "Officer Michaels, what are you doing here?" She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder. "Judge Hayes, I need to talk to you. It's about what happened yesterday." "There's more to it than you know." Jamal hesitated, then undid the chain. As Michael stepped inside, he noticed her hands were shaking. "What's going on, officer?" he asked, leading her to the living room. Michaels took a deep breath. That traffic stop yesterday, it wasn't random. I was ordered to pull you over. Jamal's eyes widened. Ordered? By whom? I don't know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The order came from higher up. They told me to find any reason to stop you, to provoke an incident. I didn't know why. I followed orders. Jamal sank into his chair, his mind reeling. Why are you telling me this now? Michaels looked down, shame evident on her face. Because what you said yesterday, it got to me. I became a cop to help people, not to be a pawn in someone's game. When I heard about the corruption allegations against you, I knew something wasn't right. As Jamal processed this information, another knock came at the door. This time, it was Marcus. Jamal, we've got a problem, Marcus said as he entered, then stopped short at the sight of Officer Michaels. What's she doing here? Quickly, Jamal brought Marcus up to speed. The detective's face grew darker with each revelation. Ooh, this goes deeper than we thought, Marcus said grimly. I did some digging on Apex builders. They're currently bidding on a massive city contract, one that would be worth millions, but their history of violations should disqualify them. Unless they can discredit the judge who made those rulings, Jamal finished, the pieces falling into place. Officer Michaels spoke up, her voice stronger now. There's more. I've heard rumors at the station. Some of the higher-ups are in Apex's pocket. They've been burying reports, looking the other way on violations. The three looked at each other, the gravity of the situation sinking in. This wasn't just about Jamal anymore. It was about corruption that ran through the entire system, from the police force to the highest levels of city government. We need proof, Jamal said, his judicial mind kicking into gear. Without hard evidence, it's our word against theirs. Marcus nodded. I might be able to get access to some internal police records, if we can connect the dots between Apex and the corrupt officers. And I can help, Michaels added, a newfound resolve in her voice. I know which officers to watch, which ones have been acting suspiciously. Jamal looked at them both, feeling a glimmer of hope. It's risky. If we're caught, it's worth the risk, Marcus said firmly. This is bigger than any of us. As they began to formulate a plan, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into dangerous territory. They were up against powerful people who wouldn't hesitate to protect their interests. But he also knew they couldn't back down. Too much was at stake. Not just his reputation, but the integrity of the entire justice system. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across his living room, Jamal made a silent vow. He would see this through, no matter the cost. The truth had to come out. Little did he know, the path to that truth would lead him into the darkest corners of corruption and put everything he held dear at risk. As they finalized their plans, Jamal's phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Back off, Judge. Last warning. Jamal showed the message to Marcus and Michaels. Their faces hardened with resolve. They're getting nervous, Marcus said. We must be on the right track. Michaels nodded grimly. So, what's our next move, Judge? Jamal looked at his unlikely allies, a detective friend and a police officer he'd met under the worst circumstances. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. We follow the money, he said firmly. Every corrupt deal leaves a trail. We just need to find it. As night fell over the city, the three conspirators bent over laptops and documents, unaware that their every move was being watched. The game was afoot, and the stakes were higher than they could possibly imagine. We follow the money, he said firmly. Every corrupt deal leaves a trail. We just need to find it. As the night wore on, Jamal, Marcus, and Officer Michaels pored over documents, cross-referencing dates, names, and transactions. The living room table was covered in papers, laptops hummed, and the air was thick with tension. Look at this, Marcus said, pointing to his screen. There's a pattern of large deposits into the account of Deputy Chief Richards. They coincide with key decisions favoring Apex builders. Jamal leaned in, his eyes narrowing. Can we trace those deposits back to Apex? Marcus shook his head. Not directly. They're coming from a shell company. But get this. The shell company was registered by a law firm that represents Apex in several cases. Officer Michaels spoke up, her voice tense. Richards has been pushing hard for increased patrols in areas where Apex has properties. Said it was about community safety. But now we know better. Jamal finished grimly. But this isn't enough. We need irrefutable proof of the connection between Apex and the police department. A loud knock at the door made them all jump. Jamal approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. His heart raced as he recognized the figure outside. "It's Captain Roberts," he whispered to the others. Marcus and Michaels exchanged worried glances. "Should we hide?" Michaels asked. Jamal thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No. If he's part of this, hiding you will only make us look guilty. If he's not, maybe he can help." He opened the door, forcing a calm expression. "Captain Roberts, this is unexpected." Roberts' face was grim. "Judge Hayes, may I come in?" As Roberts entered, his eyes widened at the sight of Marcus and Michaels. "Detective Johnson, Officer Michaels, what's going on here?" Jamal took a deep breath. It was time to take a leap of faith. "Captain, we're investigating corruption within the police department and its connection to Apex builders. We believe the traffic stop and the allegations against me are part of a larger conspiracy." Roberts' face remained impassive. For a long moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Then, to everyone's surprise, he sighed heavily and sank into a chair. "I knew something wasn't right," he said, his voice weary. "I've been noticing irregularities for months, but every time I tried to look into it, I hit a wall." Relief washed over Jamal. "So you're not involved?" Roberts shook his head. "No, but I've been afraid to dig too deep. These people, whoever they are, they've got influence. I was worried about my family, my pension." Michaels stepped forward, her face determined. "Captain, we need your help. We're close to uncovering something big, but we need access to records that only you can provide." Roberts looked at each of them in turn, conflict clear on his face. Finally, he nodded. "All right, I'm in. What do you need?" As the night turned to dawn, the group worked tirelessly, piecing together a complex web of corruption. With Roberts' help, they uncovered a trail of doctored reports, suspicious transfers, and questionable promotions. But as the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow through the windows, they realized they had a new problem. "We've got the evidence," Marcus said, rubbing his tired eyes. "But how do we use it? If we take this to the authorities, there's no guarantee it won't be buried. These people have connections all the way up to the mayor's office." Jamal paced the room, his judicial robes from the day before now rumpled and coffee-stained. "We need to make this public. Get the evidence into the hands of someone who can't be bought or intimidated." "The press," Michaels suggested. Roberts shook his head. "Too risky. We don't know who we can trust." A memory sparked in Jamal's mind. "Wait, I know someone. Sarah Chen, an old law school friend. She works for the State Attorney General's office now. If we can get this evidence to her, it could work," Marcus agreed. The State AG's office would be outside the sphere of influence of these local players. As they formulated a plan to contact Sarah, a car alarm blared outside, making them all jump. Jamal rushed to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peek out. His blood ran cold. "We've got company," he said, his voice tense. "There are 2 unmarked cars parked across the street. I don't recognize the men inside, but they're watching the house." Roberts moved to another window, his face grim. "They must have figured out we're onto them. We need to move. Now." "But how?" Michaels asked, panic edging into her voice. "They'll see us leave." Jamal's mind raced. Then he remembered. The back gate. It led to an alley that connected to the next street over. "I have an idea," he said, "but we'll need a distraction." Quickly, they hatched a plan. Roberts would leave openly, drawing the watchers' attention. Meanwhile, the others would slip out the back, using the early morning shadows for cover. "See, once you're clear," Roberts said, "head straight for the State AG's office. Don't stop for anything. I'll meet you there if I can shake these guys." As Roberts prepared to leave, Jamal gripped his arm. "Thank you, Captain, for everything." Roberts nodded solemnly. "Just promise me one thing, Judge. When this is all over, we'll use this as a chance to really clean house. No more half measures." "You have my word," Jamal replied. Moments later, Roberts strode out the front door, making a show of checking his watch and hurrying to his car. As predicted, one of the unmarked cars pulled out, following him. "Now's our chance," Marcus whispered. Heart pounding, Jamal led Marcus and Michaels through the kitchen and out the back door. They crept along the fence, staying low, until they reached the gate. Jamal eased it open, wincing at every creak. They slipped into the alley, moving as quickly and quietly as they could. Just as they reached the end, they heard shouts behind them. "They've been made!" Michaels hissed. "Run!" Jamal ordered. They burst out onto the street, sprinting towards Marcus's car parked a block away. Behind them, they could hear footsteps and angry voices. As they piled into the car, a shot rang out, shattering the rear window. Marcus gunned the engine, tires screeching as they peeled away. "Everyone okay?" Jamal asked, his heart hammering. "I'm hit," Michaels gasped from the back seat. "It's just a graze. But hang on," Marcus said grimly, weaving through traffic. "We're almost there." As they raced towards the state attorney general's office, Jamal clutched the flash drive containing their evidence. Everything they'd worked for, everything they'd risked, was contained in this small device. But as they turned onto the main street leading to their destination, Jamal's heart sank. A police blockade stretched across the road, lights flashing. "It's a trap," he realized aloud. "They knew we'd come here." Marcus's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "What now, Judge?" Jamal closed his eyes, his mind racing. They were out of options, out of time. Opening his eyes, he made a decision that would change everything. "The media," he said. "It's our only chance. Marcus, head for Channel 7 News. We're going to broadcast the truth to the entire city." As Marcus swerved onto a side street, narrowly avoiding the blockade, Jamal knew they were racing against time. Their pursuers would figure out their destination soon enough. But for now, they had a slim lead. And sometimes, Jamal thought, a slim lead was all you needed to change the world. As they sped through the awakening city, the first rays of sunlight glinting off skyscrapers, Jamal sent up a silent prayer. They had one shot at this, one chance to expose the truth and bring down a corrupt system. "Hold on, everyone," Marcus called out as he took a sharp turn. But we're almost there. The Channel 7 News building loomed ahead, a beacon of hope in their desperate flight. But as they approached, Jamal spotted more police cars converging from side streets. "They're boxing us in," he realized. "Marcus, we need to—" His words were cut off as their car was suddenly T-boned by a large SUV. The world spun, metal screamed, and everything went black. The world spun, metal screamed, and everything went black. Jamal came to with a groan, his head pounding. Smoke filled his nostrils, and he could taste blood in his mouth. Blinking away the fog, he took in the scene around him. Their car was on its side, steam hissing from the crumpled hood. Marcus was slumped over the steering wheel, a gash on his forehead. In the back seat, Michaels was stirring, her face contorted in pain. "Marcus? Michaels?" Jamal called out, his voice hoarse. Marcus lifted his head slowly, wincing. "I'm okay, I think. Michaels." "Still here," she mumbled from the back. "But I can't move my leg. It's pinned." Outside, Jamal could hear sirens approaching. They were out of time. The flash drive, he suddenly remembered, patting his pockets frantically. Relief washed over him as his fingers closed around the small device. Their evidence was safe. "We need to move," Jamal said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "Can you get out, Marcus?" Marcus nodded, already working on his door. With a grunt, he managed to push it open and climb out. Jamal followed. Then they both turned to Michaels. "My leg's stuck," she said, panic edging into her voice. "The door's crushed. I can't—" "We'll get you out," Jamal promised. He and Marcus began pulling at the wreckage, ignoring the cuts on their hands as they worked to free her. The sirens were getting closer. In the distance, Jamal could see the Channel 7 building, tantalizingly close yet so far away. With a final heave, they managed to create enough space for Michaels to squeeze out. She stumbled as she put weight on her injured leg, and Jamal caught her. "We can't outrun them," Marcus said, looking at the approaching police cars. "Not with Michaels hurt." Jamal made a split-second decision. "You two create a distraction. I'll make a run for the news station." "No way," Michaels protested. "We're in this together." "Listen," Jamal said urgently. "This is bigger than any of us. The truth needs to come out, no matter what. I have the best chance of getting through alone." Marcus and Michaels exchanged a look, then nodded reluctantly. "Be careful, Judge," Marcus said. "You too," Jamal replied. He pressed the flash drive into Marcus's hand. "Just in case I don't make it, find a way to get this out." With that, Jamal took off running towards the Channel 7 building. Behind him, he heard Marcus and Michaels shouting, drawing the attention of the approaching officers. Jamal's lungs burned as he sprinted down the sidewalk. His body, battered from the crash, protested with every step, but he pushed on, driven by a desperate need to expose the truth. He was halfway to the building when a police cruiser screeched to a halt in front of him. Jamal veered into an alley, heart pounding as he heard footsteps pounding after him. The alley was a maze of dumpsters and fire escapes. Jamal zigzagged through, vaulting over obstacles and ducking under low-hanging pipes. His pursuer was gaining ground, the sound of heavy breathing getting closer. Just as Jamal thought he might lose his lead, he spotted a partially open door in the side of a building. Without hesitation, he darted inside. He found himself in a dimly lit storeroom, filled with shelves of cleaning supplies. Jamal crouched behind a stack of boxes, trying to quiet his ragged breathing as he heard the officer run past the door. For a moment, all was quiet. Then, a voice crackled over a radio. "All units, be advised. Suspect Jamal Hayes is headed towards Channel 7 News. Apprehend at all costs. He is to be considered armed and dangerous." Jamal's blood ran cold. They were painting him as a criminal, setting the stage to discredit anything he might say. He needed to get to the news station fast, before they could spin their narrative. Cautiously, he made his way through the building. It seemed to be some kind of office, deserted in the early morning hours. As he passed a window, Jamal realized with a jolt that he was actually in the building adjacent to Channel 7. An idea formed in his mind. It was risky, possibly insane, but it might be his only chance. Jamal found the stairwell and climbed to the roof. The cool morning air hit him as he emerged, and he could see the Channel 7 building looming next door. Between the two buildings was an alley, about 10 feet wide. "I must be out of my mind," Jamal muttered as he backed up for a running start. He sprinted across the roof, his heart in his throat. Just as he reached the edge, he pushed off with all his might. For a terrifying moment, Jamal was airborne, the alley yawning beneath him. Then his feet hit the opposite roof, and he rolled to absorb the impact. Panting, Jamal picked himself up. He'd made it. He was on the roof of Channel 7 News. Finding the roof access door, Jamal made his way into the building. He could hear the bustle of the newsroom below, preparing for the morning broadcast. As he descended the stairs, Jamal's mind raced. How could he convince them to put him on air? Would they even believe him? He burst into the newsroom, causing heads to turn. "My name is Judge Jamal Hayes," he announced, his voice carrying across the stunned silence. "I have evidence of widespread corruption in the police force and city government. I need to speak on air immediately." For a moment, no one moved. Then a woman stepped forward, her eyes sharp with interest. "I'm Linda Chen, executive producer. You have 2 minutes to convince me why I should risk my career on this." Jamal took a deep breath and began to speak. He laid out the evidence they'd uncovered, the connections between Apex builders and corrupt officials, the attempts to silence him. As he spoke, he saw the shock and realization dawning on Linda's face. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she turned to her team. "Get him to makeup. We're going live in 10 minutes. A flurry of activity erupted around Jamal. As a makeup artist dabbed at his cuts and bruises, Linda briefed him on what to expect. "We'll introduce you. Then you'll have 5 minutes to present your case. Be clear, be concise, and be ready for pushback. Once this airs, all hell is going to break loose." Jamal nodded, his heart racing. This was it, the moment of truth. As he was led to the set, Jamal caught sight of a TV in the corner. His breath caught as he saw footage of Marcus and Michaels being arrested, labeled as accomplices in Judge's crime spree. Anger and determination surged through him. He had to set the record straight, not just for himself, but for them. The lights on set were blinding as Jamal took his seat. The anchor, a man with a perfectly coiffed haircut, gave him a questioning look. "We're live in 30 seconds, a voice called out. Jamal closed his eyes, centering himself. He thought of all the people who had been wronged by this corrupt system, of Marcus and Michaels, who had risked everything to help him, of young Tommy, growing up in a world where justice seemed like a distant dream. And we're live in 3, 2, 1. The anchor's voice was smooth and professional. "We interrupt our regular programming for a special report. Joining us now is Judge Jamal Hayes, who claims to have evidence of widespread corruption in our city's government and police force. Judge Hayes, you have the floor." Jamal looked directly into the camera, his voice steady and clear. "Citizens of our great city, I come to you today with a heavy heart and an urgent message. Our justice system, the very foundation of our society, has been corrupted." As Jamal spoke, laying out the evidence and connections they'd uncovered, he could see the shock on the faces of the crew around him. Phones began ringing off the hook in the background. He was halfway through his explanation when the studio doors burst open. A group of police officers, led by Deputy Chief Richards, stormed in. "Cut the feed!" Richards bellowed. "This man is under arrest!" But Linda Chen stepped between them and the camera. "We're live, gentlemen. Any attempt to interfere will be seen by millions of viewers." Richards hesitated, clearly torn between his orders and the potential backlash. Jamal seized the moment. "Citizens, what you're witnessing now is an attempt to silence the truth. I implore you, don't let this be buried. Demand answers. Demand justice." As the officers moved towards him, Jamal stood tall, his voice ringing out. "The truth will prevail, no matter what happens to me. Remember this day. Remember that one voice can make a difference." The last thing viewers saw before the feed cut out was Jamal being led away in handcuffs, his head held high. But as the officers escorted him out of the building, Jamal knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a much larger battle. In police cars across the city, radios crackled with urgent messages. On street corners, people huddled around phones, watching clips of Jamal's broadcast. And in living rooms throughout the city, citizens began to ask questions, to demand answers. The spark had been lit. Now, it was up to the people to fan it into a flame of change. As Jamal was pushed into a police car, he caught a glimpse of the city skyline, bathed in the golden light of dawn. Despite everything, he felt a glimmer of hope. The truth was out there now, and no matter what happened next, he knew that the fight for justice would continue. As the police car sped through the awakening city, Jamal's mind raced. He had done what he set out to do, expose the truth. But what would happen now? Would his sacrifice be in vain, or would it spark the change the city so desperately needed? The car pulled into the police station, where a crowd of reporters had already gathered. Camera flashes exploded as Jamal was led inside, his head held high despite the handcuffs binding his wrists. Inside, the station was chaos. Officers argued in hushed tones, phones rang incessantly, and there was a palpable tension in the air. Jamal was led to an interrogation room and left alone, the door slamming shut behind him. Hours passed. Jamal could hear muffled shouts and hurried footsteps outside. Something was happening, but he was cut off from it all. Finally, the door opened. To Jamal's surprise, it was Captain Roberts who entered, looking haggard but determined. "Judge Hayes," he said, his voice low, "you've stirred up one hell of a hornet's nest." Jamal leaned forward. "What's happening out there, Captain?" Roberts sank into the chair across from him. "Your broadcast. It's everywhere. Social media, news channels, even international outlets are picking it up. People are demanding answers, protesting in the streets." A glimmer of hope sparked in Jamal's chest. "And the evidence? The flash drive?" "Safe," Roberts assured him. "Detective Johnson managed to get it to Sarah Chen at the State Attorney General's office before he was arrested. They're going through it now." Jamal let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "So what happens next?" Before Roberts could answer, the door burst open. Deputy Chief Richards stormed in, his face red with fury. "You're finished, Hayes," he snarled. "By the time we're done, you'll be lucky if you ever see the outside of a cell again." But Roberts stood, placing himself between Jamal and Richards. "That's enough, Deputy Chief. The State Attorney General's office is taking over this investigation. Judge Hayes is to be released immediately." Richards' face paled. "You can't do that. You have no authority." "Actually, he does," a new voice said. Sarah Chen walked in, flanked by two stern-looking agents. "By order of the Attorney General, this entire department is under investigation. Deputy Chief Richards, you're under arrest for corruption, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy." As Richards was led away, protesting loudly, Sarah turned to Jamal. "You took one hell of a risk, old friend, but it paid off. We've got enough evidence to bring down half the city government." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Jamal found himself at the center of a storm of media attention, legal proceedings, and public outcry. The evidence he and his allies had gathered proved damning. One by one, corrupt officials were arrested, from low-level cops to high-ranking city officials. Apex builders, illegal activities were exposed, leading to the company's downfall. Jack Wilson, Tommy's father, was among those arrested, charged with bribery and fraud. But amidst the satisfaction of seeing justice served, Jamal couldn't shake a sense of unease. The system that had allowed this corruption to flourish was still in place. Real, lasting change would require more than just arresting a few bad actors. It was this thought that led Jamal to make a decision that would shape the rest of his life. On a crisp autumn morning, Jamal stood before a podium, cameras flashing as he prepared to address the city. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. "Citizens of our great city, we have weathered a storm of corruption and deceit. We have seen how those entrusted with power can abuse it for personal gain. But we have also seen the power of truth and the courage of those willing to stand up for what's right." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces before him. "It is not enough to simply remove the bad apples. We must examine the entire orchard. That is why, today, I am announcing my resignation from the bench." A murmur ran through the crowd. Jamal held up a hand for silence. "I am stepping down not because I am guilty, but because I believe I can do more good working outside the system. I'm establishing an independent watchdog organization dedicated to rooting out corruption and ensuring transparency in our government and law enforcement agencies." As he continued to outline his plans, Jamal could see the mix of emotions on the faces before him. Surprise, respect, hope. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready for the challenge. In the weeks that followed, Jamal threw himself into his new role. He assembled a team of dedicated individuals, including Marcus and Michaels, who had been cleared of all charges. Together, they worked tirelessly to build an organization that would serve as a check on power and a voice for the voiceless. It wasn't easy. They faced resistance from those who preferred the status quo, threats from those with something to hide. But they also found allies in unexpected places, honest cops who were tired of the corruption, community leaders who wanted to see real change, ordinary citizens inspired to take a stand. 1 year after his fateful broadcast, Jamal stood in the community center of the neighborhood, where he'd once been wrongfully stopped. The room was packed with people from all walks of life, gathered to hear about the progress of his organization. As he looked out at the crowd, Jamal spotted a familiar face. It was Tommy, the boy who had warned him that day long ago. Tommy was older now, his face more serious, but his eyes still held that same curiosity. After the meeting, Tommy approached Jamal. "Judge Hayes, Mr. Hayes, I wanted to thank you. What you did, it changed things. My dad, he's in prison now, but I understand why, and I want to help make things better, like you did." Jamal felt a lump in his throat. He placed a hand on Tommy's shoulder. "You already have, Tommy. You took a stand that day, and that's where it all starts, with one person willing to do the right thing." As Tommy walked away, Jamal felt a renewed sense of purpose. The work was far from over. There would always be those who sought to abuse power, to twist the system for their own gain, but there would also always be those willing to stand against them. Later that night, Jamal stood on the balcony of his apartment, looking out over the city. The lights twinkled in the darkness, each one representing a life, a story, a potential for change. He thought about how far they'd come, and how far they still had to go. The system wasn't perfect. It might never be. But it was better, more transparent, more accountable, and most importantly, people were awake now. They were watching, questioning, demanding better from their leaders and institutions. As he turned to go inside, Jamal's phone buzzed with a text. It was from Sarah Chen at the Attorney General's office. "New lead on corruption in the mayor's office. You up for another fight?" Jamal smiled. Some might have been daunted by the prospect of another battle, but for him, it was a reminder of why he'd started this journey in the first place. He typed back a simple response, "Always." Closing the balcony door behind him, Jamal felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had chosen a difficult path, one that would likely never end, but it was the right path. And as long as there were people willing to stand up for what was right, there was hope. The city slept, unaware of the battles being fought on its behalf. But Jamal Hayes was wide awake, ready to face whatever challenges the new day might bring. For he knew now, more than ever, that one voice could indeed make a difference, and he would keep raising his voice, keep fighting the good fight, for as long as it took. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Jamal allowed himself a moment of reflection. The journey that had begun with a simple traffic stop had led him here, to a place he never could have imagined. He thought of all the lives that had been touched, all the changes that had been set in motion, and he knew, with unshakable certainty, that it had all been worth it. With renewed determination, Jamal turned to face the new day. The fight for justice was far from over, but he was ready to stand tall, to speak truth to power, to be the change he wanted to see in the world. And as the sun rose fully, bathing the city in its warm light, Jamal Hayes stepped forward into a future full of challenges, but also full of hope. For he had learned the most important lesson of all, that in the face of injustice, silence was never an option. And that even in the darkest of times, one voice, raised in the name of truth and justice, could light the way forward.